Hi, this is a quick video just to see if I can fit a Quansheng low angle jack plane blade into a Stanley low angle jack plane. The reason for doing that is, from what I can find, is the blades for the Stanley are not available. I can't find one for sale. So I'm going to see if I can adapt the Quansheng one to fit. They're readily available. They're about £30 each plus delivery. The Quansheng is quite a bit thinner. It's much the same size, although it is about 2mm wider than the Stanley. And I can deal with that because I can grind 1mm off each side on the bench grinder. The problem I've got is the holes don't quite line up. I think the first hole, this one, is usable, but it's too small of a diameter. So I know it's high-speed steel and it's not going to be as easy to do, but I'm going to see if I can increase the diameter of that hole to the same size as the Stanley and see if I can get the blade to fit and work. So I'm just going to go into the garage now and see if I can come up with a solution for enlarging it, and then I'll come back. So we're back on whether you can put a Quansheng low angle jack plane into a Stanley Sweetheart low angle jack plane. The purpose of this video was to see if it's possible to get a replacement blade for a Stanley, because from what I can see they're not available. And the short answer is yes, you can get the blade to fit and it will work, but there are compromises. So I'll show you how I did that, how I got it to work and what I've done to it, and then I'll explain the negatives and the positives to doing it. So that's the original blade. And that's the Quansheng one, which fits. Now, the first part of the job was to drill these holes out here. You only really need the first one, but I've drilled them both out. I thought I was going to have a problem with that being hard steel, but it actually drills really easily with a ratchet drill, running very slowly, and just a 6mm drill bit. It's a little bit snug on the pin, so you might have to sort of ream the hole a little bit to get it to fit, but that part was easy. I then ground I put one blade on top of the other and marked it with a permanent marker, roughly lined it up centre, and I marked down either side of the permanent marker, and I ground that off on a bench grinder. That was time consuming. It probably took me 3/4 of an hour to an hour to take that off without generating any heat into the blade, but it's doable. And then the blade will fit. And then we get on to the compromises. So inevitably, when you're doing this sort of thing, there's going to be a compromise. So because this blade is so much thinner than the existing one, the original one, the first issue is that when you put it into the blade, when you put the blade into the plane, the capping iron hasn't got enough thread on it to tighten the blade down. I've slightly adapted this one, well, I've slightly modified it in that I've polished this surface here, but there isn't enough thread on the capping iron to tighten it. So the solution I came up with there was to put a small copper washer underneath that screw. It took a few attempts with different ones. The first one I made was steel, because I coned the washer slightly. I'll show you how I did that. But the steel one was slightly marking up the aluminium, because this is only aluminium, this cap iron. So what I decided to do was I got a piece of copper pipe, I nailed it and sawed a piece out of it, flattened it, and made a soft copper washer, which is kinder to the blade cap. I have put a little bit of grease, heavy grease on there, so that it stays up against the top. It just makes it easier to have that holding on to the top of the thread. So that small washer made out of a piece of copper pipe is sufficient for the cap to start to tighten, and the only drawback I can see is actually holding that up whilst you put the cap in, and then it works just fine. So I made the coned washer. I got a piece of copper pipe and nailed it. I drilled let me just have a look at the size of the drill bit. A 5.5mm hole in it, and then the steel washer that I had, which was the right size, I put over it, just drew around it, and once I'd got that, I just used a pair of tin snips, because it's soft copper now, and cut round it in straight lines, and then filed it to a round. Now, to make it into a cone shape, I used something really basic, just a scrap piece of wood with a big washer in and a countersunk screw. And when you screw the screw down into the middle of the bigger washer, it will cone the washer slightly. And it's a simple hack, but it works. I then just took the sharp edges off with a bit of a small needle file and a bit of emery paper. So it's working well. It's doing everything from very fine shavings that you can see through, and I've done heavier stuff where it just curls off with a heavier cut, so it all works fine. Now, from a practical thing, is it feasible? Is it practical? Well, it's not so easy to just take the original blade out and put this one in, and the reason for that is, if you were doing this to have two blades, two different angles, if you were using the original blade and one of these, it's a bit of a faff to swap it over, because you would need to take the washer off the cap screw, and also the adjusters need to be in a different place. I don't know whether you can see that, but they are right at the end of their limits, so that one's right on the end there, and that one also is past its thicker thread. that's because the hole you're using is different in relation to the blade. So because from this hole to there is shorter, the adjuster has to be further along. So it means you've got to adjust this to a certain position and a different position for the original blade. So I don't think it's feasible if your idea is to have a second blade with a different angle. I don't think it's a feasible option. There is the possibility that you could have two of these blades and have two angles and then just swap those out. That's a possibility. The other thing is, if what you've got to notice is that obviously this is a lot better steel than that one. This is A2 and this is more along the lines of a traditional plain blade, I would say. It's all right, it sharpens okay, but it's not as hard. It's easier to sharpen, but it's not as hard wearing as this one. It won't hold its edge as well. So does this hack work? At the end of the day, it is a hack and there are compromises. But I would say if you've got one of these and for some reason you don't have a blade, maybe your blade's worn out or there's another reason that the original blade is missing, then this is a hack that will get your plane up and running. You'll be able to use it. Is it a hack to have two sets of blades and two different angles? I think probably not, unless you get two of the crankshank blades and put the angles on you want. I suppose is a possibility, but I think it's, for me personally, I have other jack planes, so I don't need to have a plane with a different angle on blading. I can use the other jack planes and just use this for what it's best at. But if you've got one of these and for some reason you haven't got a blade, then it is feasible. It's a feasible hack to put one of those blades in to get your plane working again, so you haven't got to buy another plane. You could just buy a blade and adapt it like this. There are variables. This screw here is at its limits with that copper washer there, so it's nearly as far down as it will go on its thread. So that copper washer, obviously copper pipes are different thicknesses and mine is only just thick enough. So there are variables in the thickness of the washer that you put on. Depends on whether you've got enough screw on here to tighten. But I think it's answered the question I was asking, which was if you were stuck for a blade, could you modify one? And I think in that respect you could modify one of these blades and make it work. So it was just a question I was asking myself. This video was just me experimenting to see what's feasible and what isn't. So I hope it's of interest or use to somebody. So I do have some other videos on the modern Stanley Sweetheart planes. I have a couple of other videos on those which also give a bit of context about myself. So I hope this has been of use to you or of interest, and I think I've covered just about everything that I need to cover. So if you've any questions, I will try and answer them if you want to ask me a question on it. And thank you for watching and take care.